Before we begin today's video, please remember to subscribe, share our videos with others, and browse the channel to watch other enjoyable videos. Additionally, if you enjoy our videos, you can watch each new release 1 week early for just $3.99 per month. Act fast, this deal won't last forever. Starting January 1st, 2026, the price will increase to $4.29. Email the address on screen to sign up. The modern native inhabitants of Europe primarily consist of a broad cultural and language group known as the Indo-Europeans. However, this specific group has not always dominated the continent. The Indo-Europeans originated in Central Asia, roughly where the modern nation of Kazakhstan is situated. Before their spread westward, Europe was inhabited by various language families and tribes, including Etruscan in Italy, Basque in Spain, and many others, with the latter example still existing in the modern era. Numerous other tribes existed throughout the continent, though information about them is largely unknown due to the lack of formal written records at the time. However, there are some remnants of words from these languages borrowed by Indo-European cultures, like the Seine in France, Douro in Spain, Avon in England, and Danube rivers. Eventually, a gradual change in climate occurred in Central Asia, causing many Indo-Europeans to starve due to crop failures. Additionally, overpopulation became a problem, further reinforcing the need for expansion into nearby regions. People traveled south toward India and west toward Europe, hence their name, Indo-Europeans. The populations who spread into Europe gradually began to dominate Finland, the Baltics, and Poland, where they eventually became known as Uralic, Baltic, and Slavic. Those who migrated further into Germany and Scandinavia would later evolve into Germanic tribes, dominating northern Europe, and those who migrated south became the Italics and Latins. Although many Indo-Europeans stopped in Eastern or Central Europe, many of them proceeded further west, becoming the Celts, who would populate Czechia, Austria, and northern Italy, before spreading into France, Britain, and finally Ireland. Despite the Latin group not being the most widespread, many of their settlements, specifically Italic ones in southern Italy, began the construction of what would become the most technologically advanced city of its time. It was founded by a man living near the Tiber River at the Palatine Hill. This man, named Romulus, was the founder of Rome. The Romans quickly used their immense power from their city to begin territorial conquests. It began with small wars with the Etruscans and Sabines, but eventually escalated to a military confrontation with another newly risen civilization, the Greeks. The Greeks were a unique Indo-European group known as the Hellenics, and were distinct from Slavic, Latin, and other nearby societies. Soon after, another conflict occurred in Sicily, where both Romans and Carthaginians from Tunisia sought to establish colonies. After a series of wars, which also included major clashes in Iberia, the Romans emerged victorious, expanding their influence into the entirety of southern Italy, along with the Iberian Peninsula. When the Romans then expanded to the north, they met strong resistance by the various Celtic tribes in the region. As described earlier, the Celts were the most widespread population in Europe, though they had not yet organized themselves into a political state like the Romans did, which ultimately led to them being conquered by Roman troops. It started just in the Italian peninsula, but eventually, Rome pushed the front lines further north until the entirety of Gaul and southern Britain was in their control. Rome constructed new cities in these areas, and Roman settlers gradually replaced the Celts, most of whom would escape into Scotland and Ireland. Over time, Roman authority began to crumble, ultimately leading to a split between the East and West, with the West collapsing and the East continuing its existence as the Byzantine Empire. In around the year 300 CE, Germanic tribes began to migrate toward Gaul, who would ultimately integrate with the Gaulish Celts and Latins to become the French. Roughly a century later, in the year 410 CE, Saxons, Jutes, and Angles from the Danish peninsula crossed the sea into Britain. They arrived as soldiers for Britain, who were vulnerable due to the threat of the much stronger Picts and Scots in the north. These soldiers established their own small kingdoms, and one of them, Wessex, would ultimately conquest numerous other kingdoms and form England. 1 millennium later, many of these European kingdoms, primarily Spain, England, or later the United Kingdom, and Portugal, began to colonize vast regions in the Americas. Spain controlled half of everything, Portugal had Brazil, and England had Canada and numerous Caribbean settlements. Within 3 centuries of the entire American continents being overtaken by Europeans, a new state, named the United States of America, as well as the successors to European colonial empires, emerged and expanded their influence while the Europeans moved on to colonize Africa. By the early 20th century, the world was filled with vast, intelligent empires, all of which were culturally and linguistically European. Even the United States, despite not being geographically European, spoke a European language and was dominated by descendants of European settlers. As the 20th century progressed, this expansion only continued to grow. The English and French languages became widespread across Africa and even parts of Asia. The Americas continued to obtain European-rooted cultures, and even the moon and outer space was first reached by people of European culture. As of today, approximately 90% of people can speak an Indo-European language. Between the rise of the Slavs, Celts, Romans, Germans, French, Spanish, English, and Indians to an extent, the modern world exists because of Central Asian Indo-Europeans from Kazakhstan.